So this morning I'm going to talk about commitment and consistency, and I don't have a structure for this, so we'll see how it goes. Basically, most people think that project management is about keeping promises. There's an exercise I do when I do training courses. I ask people to, long story short, I ask people to write down words and phrases that they associate with a project that's going well. And almost the first thing that they write down is on time and to budget. So keeping a promise for when it's going to be delivered, keeping a promise for how much it's going to cost. This is just what people think projects are about. And of course there's a hugely difficult issue here about that, because projects are inherently uncertain things. If they weren't inherently uncertain, then we wouldn't have all the hoo-ha of a project to try and get it done. If we could somehow just press a button and it would be done, we would do that. And so what's going on here is people are talking about this principle that there's a psychological writer called Robert Cialdini. He wrote a book called it's not Delivering the Impossible. His book is called Influence. And his book is all about different ways that we get manipulated by people that he calls influence professionals. And commitment and consistency is one of these ways that we get manipulated. And the reason is because in evolutionary terms, this is one explanation anyway. I'm not a big fan of explaining everything in evolutionary psychology terms, but in evolutionary terms, here I go. Of course, we can imagine that there's a lot of value in keeping your word and doing what you say you're going to do. And people who don't keep their word and don't do what they say they're going to do are regarded as weird. And in ancient times, that would probably be a bad thing, to be regarded as weird, and you might get shunned, you might get ostracized. So the thing about this commitment and consistency is that it can be used to manipulate you. So that basic principle, which is a good principle about doing what you say you're going to do and keeping your word, can be used to manipulate you. And this is something that Robert Cialdini calls commitment and consistency jiu-jitsu. So it's a martial art, right? So it's a way of fighting. It's not a basic nice thing. And we see this a lot in project management. We see commitment and consistency not being used as a basic nice human principle, but as a martial art, as a way of making you do things that you don't want to do or that you shouldn't be doing. And one of the ways this works in project management is that almost no project will get kicked off unless there was some kind of promise made or some kind of promise interpreted about when something was going to be delivered, and often by implication how much it will cost. And so very often the only way that we've got going with a project at all is that some kind of promise is being made. And this is extremely problematic if you're the poor person who's the project manager. And the only real thing that you can do to combat this is try and extract commitments in return, and also try and extract honest commitments in return rather than manipulating people using commitment and consistency jiu-jitsu. So what do I mean by extracting commitments in return? So, for example, if you've been asked to commit to delivering a project to a deadline, and it's always a challenging deadline, then what you need to ask for in return is you say, okay, well, we're going to do our absolute best to deliver this thing for this deadline, but what I need from you in return is a commitment that when we encounter problems that are things that we can't deal with in the team, these are problems that we can bring to you, and you will give us a fair hearing, and you will do what you can to help us with those problems. Because that's the other slightly strange thing about commitment and consistency, is that the kind of idea, the dynamic in project management is that once someone has extracted that commitment from you, then this whole thing is not their problem anymore. But what you're trying to do by extracting commitments in the other direction is you're trying to make it their problem as well. And the reason that you're doing this is because if you don't do that, you don't have any chance of making the project succeed.